People doing extraordinary things to help others.
If he didn't do what he did, we would have died.
Heroic acts that have sometimes meant the difference between life and death.
And he was just crying, "Don't let me die, don't let me die, save me, save me."
Amazing acts of courage.
It was just a natural reaction. This guy needs help.
Captured on dash cams, CCTV, and mobile phones. Incredible stories from the UK.
He put his life at risk just to save me.
And across the world.
Mayday, mayday, mayday.
All the people that assisted with my rescues that day are my heroes.
We genuinely owe our lives to him.
Today on Saved on Camera. In Indonesia, an Australian family's vehicle starts to disappear into a sinkhole.
I just yelled to Muggy, get out of the car.
Get out and get Sebastian out.
With their 2-year-old strapped in the back, they have only seconds to try and escape.
I said to Michael, you need to get out of the car. You need to get out of the car fast.
In the UK, a teenage boy climbing on a gorge slips and falls, bouncing off the rocks on the way down.
It was obvious straight away that he wasn't okay and that he'd hurt himself.
The rescue services are on the way. But he's lying at the bottom of a remote location, and it's gonna be difficult to get him out.
He could have bled to death, and there would have been little that we could have done for him at that point.
In Western Australia, a manta ray has been injured by fishing gear, making it vulnerable to prey, unless it can be saved quickly.
I knew that she was going to pull away pretty quick once I got hold of him, so I knew there was only one shot at her.
And in the UK, a man loses control of his van after having a stroke on a busy dual carriageway.
We looked through the passenger window and saw him collapsed.
Fellow road users desperately try to stop him from colliding with other vehicles. But can they stop him on time?
But he'd obviously still got his foot on the throttle. He was still running up against the barrier.
A young Australian family lose everything as the ground opens up beneath them.
I just yelled to Muggy, get out of the car.
Get out and get Sebastian out. I just jumped and did what he said.
With only seconds to react, will they be able to get toddler Sebastian out in time? The Rule family from Australia are on the adventure of a lifetime.
My wife Muggy and my son Sebastian and I are currently travelling through Indonesia on a long-term overland journey from Australia to the UK.
Back home in Australia, we were both marine scientists. We both have PhDs and spent way too many years studying, so we decided we needed a change.
Having left their old lives behind, they jumped in their Jeep and hit the road with a toddler in tow.
Sebastian is just under 2 years old now. He's got a really adventurous spirit, and we have a really good time showing him the world.
They had their beloved vehicle shipped all the way to Indonesia. As well as being their transport, it would also be their home.
Back in December, we left Australia and flew to Timor-Leste. We drove across the border into Indonesia and visited a range of islands through there: Sumba, Flores, Sumbawa, Lombok, Bali, and now we're in Java.
But one fateful day, their lives were to be turned upside down, literally.
We'd been camping up in the mountains outside Yogyakarta, and we were just coming down from there to get some lunch and to pick up our new visas from the immigration.
Their route saw them run into roadworks and more danger than they could ever have imagined.
It was crawling, so we were moving quite slowly. And just to the driver's side of the car, there was a long concrete barricade with a metal fence on top of it that we couldn't see through.
And then all of a sudden the metal and concrete barricade next to the car started shaking.
I just felt a really strange lurch to the side. I just yelled to Muggy, you know, get out of the car.
Get out and get Sebastian out. And I didn't even think, I just jumped and did what he said. Jumped out, raced around, grabbed Sebastian out. I was relieved to have Sebastian in my arms.
Margie had managed to save their toddler just in time, but Michael was still in the vehicle.
I felt like I probably shouldn't move, or I might sort of change the weight of the car.
I could see that it was teetering right on the edge and how scary it was. And that was when I raced back and said to Michael, you need to get out of the car, you need to get out of the car fast.
With the ground falling beneath them, they were just seconds away from disaster.
It was about 7 to 10 seconds he had to get out of the car.
Turned around and our car literally fell in the hole.
And theirs wasn't the only vehicle lost in the collapse.
And we could see the truck behind us had gone in and that we were actually people in that truck. It wasn't until then that we sort of realised, wow, we actually got out of there in time.
But the relief of escape soon turned back to panic as reality set in.
It was just utter devastation, watching our whole world in our home just tumble into the hole.
I mean, everything we own, our entire lives are in that car.
And we didn't have our shoes on, we didn't have our phones or our wallets or anything at all. Poor little Sebastian doesn't even have any clean nappies or dummies or anything. It's all inside the car. We're just thinking that this was the end of our trip and that we weren't going to be able to continue.
Luckily for the stranded family, the local community rallied round, recovering their vehicle and providing some much-needed support. And the incident hasn't dampened the spirit of the Rule family.
We're currently waiting for parts to be shipped in and then we can get going again. It'll put us back a couple of months, but yeah, we're going to get back on the road as soon as we can.
Meanwhile, back in the UK, on a day out with friends, a teenage boy has taken a fall from the top of a 30-foot waterfall.
I felt like I was in the air for like hours, just looking down at the rocks coming towards us.
After what seemed like an eternity, he is lying badly injured at the bottom.
It was just a really shocking thing. You just said, you're very lucky to be alive.
As the emergency services rush to the scene, they alert the mountain rescue team to help reach him. But even if they can get to him, the area is so inaccessible, it's going to be hard to get him out.
We were concerned that the helicopter might not be able to winch from the location. There was a sense of urgency to move Harry up the slope so he could be airlifted as soon as possible.
The Weatherhead family live in Stocksfield, in the UK, and are all lovers of the great outdoors.
It's like what I was saying, man, honestly, it's just, you like to be on the go all the time. You wouldn't have the patience.
Mum Katie and Dad Martin have 3 children, including their youngest, 17-year-old self-confessed daredevil, Harry.
Harry's really fun to be around. He makes us laugh a lot. But he's a typical teenager and he can sometimes be a little bit thoughtless and with little respect for his own safety.
My friends would probably describe us as quite stupid. Maybe, you know, a bit of a local legend, who knows.
When Mum and Dad decided to take a short break, they were worried about what Harry would get up to whilst they were away.
So we'd booked to go away for the night. We were just about to leave the house and the 2 boys were rushing in, gathering their stuff together to go down to the river with their friends because it was a lovely day. And my heart is always in my mouth a little bit when I hear that they're going to the river.
She even asked Harry not to go because we just wanted the night away without having to worry about if they were going to be all right.
A group of 15 of them, including Harry's friend Will, set off for local beauty spot Cramell Lynn.
It's really impressive. You drive through the moors and then you park your car and it feels like you're just in a field. And you walk for about 10 minutes and there's this big gorge. And all of a sudden there's this big pool where there was quite a few people swimming there. And we had barbecues and all sorts.
Sun was shining on the pool. Yeah, it was really nice. About halfway up the waterfall, there was a platform. People were jumping off. I did a few jumps off there, a few flips and that. It was quite easy to jump off. Well, I was getting a bit bored. I'd already jumped off the bottom bit like 3 or 4 times. So I was like, all right, okay, I'm going to climb to the top. And I was already at the top, so I was like, there's only one way down, really.
You had to climb up and get in the river about 10 metres before the actual waterfall. And normally you can walk over dry rocks to the very edge. But because it had rained recently, there was water on those rocks, so the rocks were really slippy.
But that didn't deter Harry in his quest for excitement.
So I had to keep on getting on all fours and crawling across, because otherwise you just would have slipped and probably got dragged away by the water.
Harry was up there, slipping on this slippy rock, and we were all kind of scared for him and worried.
Some people were shouting, do it, do it. And then other people were shouting, don't do it.
It went very quiet when he went to step off, and we all had a feeling in our stomachs like something bad was going to happen.
Just as I was about to jump, and I put all my weight on my left foot, just as I did that, like a little wave of water just came over, and it just made the rock slippery. I felt like I was in the air for hours, just looking down at the rocks coming towards us.
He hit the rock, and there was kind of just silence for a bit.
I remember hitting the rocks, and then I kind of blacked out a little bit at the bottom. I felt myself waking up at the bottom of the water. I pulled myself up to the top of the water.
Harry managed to drag himself out of the water and back to his friends. But as the shock wore off, his condition deteriorated.
After about 10 minutes of lying down, I tried to get up, and I just couldn't really move at all.
It was obvious straight away that he wasn't okay and that he'd hurt himself.
Harry was beginning to realise he was in serious trouble, and the pain was becoming unbearable.
It was just getting worse and worse, so that was when I realised maybe I should get some attention.
Worried about Harry's deteriorating condition, his friends decided to call for help, only to find out they couldn't get any reception.
Because it's in a kind of gorge, to get signal to call 999, one of our friends had to climb up towards where the cars were parked and call from there.
As the ambulance and helicopter were scrambled, they also called in the specialists in accessing remote areas, the mountain rescue team, and it was Ian Nixon who got the call.
17-year-old male. We received a message from the North East Ambulance Service alerting us to the fact that a male had fallen from a waterfall. Looks like trauma injuries. Obviously, our immediate reaction is you've got somebody who's possibly suffered traumatic injuries, and there was a level of urgency to respond. So within a few minutes, we had 3 blue light response vehicles on the road.
But even with the blue lights, it would take an hour to get there. And all they could do is prepare for what they might face.
We're checking how many members we have available, what skills they have, and given the location in which we knew, you couldn't get vehicle access to it. So we were thinking about what kit we might need, and in particular, what technical rope rescue kit we might require to get the casualty out.
Later, the mountain rescue team have to think fast to get Harry to safety before his condition worsens.
I was conscious that having fallen the height that he had, there was a potential for him to be bleeding internally.
Obviously, there was a sense of urgency in terms of being able to move Harry up the slope so he could be airlifted as soon as possible.
And as we were moving, Harry started to develop worsening pain up in the right-hand side of his upper abdomen.
In Western Australia, a routine trip for tourists turns into a rescue at the bottom of the sea when a diver spots a manta ray in danger.
I noticed straight away the gang hook, which is a series of 3 hooks together, pretty much right next to her eye.
It was an injury that could mean certain death for the creature.
When she was feeding, she'd become prey to a large shark.
But saving the manta ray wasn't going to be easy.
I knew that she was going to pull away pretty quick once I got hold of him, so I knew there was only one shot at her.
This is Ningaloo Reef in Western Australia. It's where desert meets sea, and it's home to some of the most diverse marine life in the world. Freediver and wildlife photographer Jake runs a tour here.
I think the best thing about my job is being able to swim and interact with all the megafauna here found in Ningaloo Reef on a daily basis. There's very few places in the world that you can swim with all these things regularly, so I'm very fortunate to have this job.
Guests on Jake's tours are normally groups of tourists, but not on this day.
It was a special day in the fact that we had the Tourism Western Australia team on filming, interacting with manta rays on the Ningaloo coast.
The reef has a residential population of manta rays who feed off the rich nutrients of the local coral. Before any of the boat tours head out, Jake's colleague Justine gives a briefing.
I usually let people know a little bit about the manta's biology to start with, and then we go into the rules of the swim and how the interaction is going to work. We always want to make sure that the impact on the animals is not too big.
With the briefing over, the party was ready to head out in search of the marine life.
Before any other tour boats were out there, we headed out to search for the rays. We happened to come across the ray right near a known cleaning station.
The manta ray was Freckles, a much-loved resident of the reef.
Freckles is what we call a coastal manta ray, one of two species of manta. Each individual manta ray has a unique belly pattern underneath with individual spots. She was one of the first manta rays to be named almost 13 or 14 years ago, and it's because she has all freckles all over her body. She's between 3.5 to 4 metres wide, 25 to 30 years old. She's a residential female manta ray here.
Before the group on the boat can enter the water, Jake needed to carry out his usual checks.
I'm generally the first person to head out, just to assess the behaviour and conditions and that, ready for the people to enter. So when I went in, I noticed straight away there was a big line hanging out from underneath her.
Jake needs to investigate, but he also needs to gain the manta's trust.
I didn't rush into it or anything, I just approached nice and slow to see how she would react. She actually stopped and then unrolled her cephalic lobe, which is the flaps on the front.
At that point, Jake made a horrifying discovery.
It was a gang hook, which is a series of 3 hooks together, and the first one was embedded just below her eye, but the other 2 were hanging loose, so they were pretty much right next to her eye, and the fishing line was trailing out the back. And if it got hooked on anything, or when she was feeding, skimming the bottom, she'd become prey to a large shark. If they hadn't got the good eyesight, then they'd probably get eaten quite quickly, without their defence. Being so close to a vulnerable area, I wasn't sure whether we'd be able to get it out or not.
Jake must take his time. He rose to the surface to get colleague Justine to help.
Jake gave me his camera and he went to try and get the hooks out.
The most difficult part was just getting close enough. She was very apprehensive because the hooks were right next to her eye. So we had to keep trying, just going slow and letting her get used to our presence and gain her trust.
There's not many people like him that are so calm and collected in the water and willing to spend the time to make sure that Freckles gained his trust.
We swam with her for probably 15 minutes before we attempted any rescue. After the first attempt, she was a bit apprehensive, but then she clued on to what was happening, then she started to approach us.
Within the first couple of goes, he managed to get close enough to cut the wire trace that was dragging behind her.
Free divers don't use oxygen tanks and can only stay under for several minutes, so Jake needs to keep rising to the surface for more air.
We had to keep trying, just going slow.
I knew Jake was getting closer and closer every time. I was just hoping that he could get the hooks out. I knew that that's what she wanted. She kept swimming right next to him, and it was sort of an indication that she wanted him to get them out.
So I used a pair of pliers because I knew that she was going to pull away pretty quick once I got hold of him. And the last thing I wanted to do was to get hooks in my hand as well.
Armed with the pliers, Jake knew he only had a small window of opportunity.
I knew I was only going to have one attempt because once you grab hold of something like that that's embedded in their body, it's going to be very painful. But you had to get a good grip to get them out.
After 30 minutes, Jake was beginning to tire, having made 8 dives to try and help Freckles.
When we went down to attempt, so I didn't rush into it.
From Jake's perspective, he just stayed really calm in the water and there was no sudden movements. He didn't want to scare her at all.
He knew he must act. It was now or never.
You could see it was painful because she flinched and pulled away. She was quite startled.
Freckles was now free of all the hooks. And the most important part of her body, her eyes, had been saved.
I felt relieved. I was just grateful that we got it out.
It was a bit sort of overwhelming. She sort of made herself really vulnerable when she let Jake take the hook out.
But what Freckles did next shocked Jake and Justine.
And she actually turned and came back over to us and just hovered there for about 15 or 20 seconds.
She just swam around him and stopped in the water, which is something I've never ever witnessed from a manta ray before. There's no way of them communicating or talking, but it feels like she was trying to say thank you.
We sat on the bottom for probably 15, 20 seconds before she slowly moved away.
We were all overcome with emotion. We actually shed a few tears. It was just a really happy ending for us all.
For Jake, though, it was just another day at the office.
At the time, I wasn't thinking much about it, to be honest.
In my eyes, I know Jake's very modest, but in the moment, I think he was a bit of a hero.
And Jake hopes his actions will have a more global reach.
You know, if people see me as a hero and get inspired to help protect the oceans and help protect more wildlife and help change what's happening to the planet, then I'd be happy with that.
And Jake couldn't be happier with how Freckles has recovered from her ordeal.
We actually seen her almost 2 weeks later and she was fine. She was feeding on the coast. So I was just very, very relieved and happy that we got it out and we could help her. She's done so much for our industry here. It's good to give the payback to the ocean, you know.
In the UK, a van driver suffers a stroke behind the wheel on a busy dual carriageway, losing control of his vehicle.
The guy had collapsed at the wheel and was totally unconscious.
Passing drivers try to help, but can they reach him in time before he runs into other traffic?
The van would have veered into the oncoming traffic, which could have been catastrophic.
Russell Douglas works as a lorry driver, a job he's enjoyed for over 20 years.
I'm an HGV driver. And, I deliver agricultural machinery around the local area.
His experience and skills are vital in safely handling his lorry, which can weigh up to 44 tons fully loaded.
It's predicting what you think the car is going to do beside you. It's preempting what the other person is going to do.
And these skills were to be put to the test when Russell was driving his lorry along the A47 near Dereham in Norfolk.
As I pulled onto the piece of dual carriageway, I just noticed the erratic behaviour of several cars in front of me, all pulling from the fast lane and diving into the near side lane. And then there was this van running up against the central reservation, being shadowed by one other car.
The whole incident was captured on a passing lorry's dashcam. Renato Notariani was the driver of the car alongside the van.
It was extremely busy. It was a Friday afternoon. Myself and my friend Tom were travelling back from a funeral that we attended in Kings Lynn. It was Tom who noticed a van driver who was in front of us, who actually came from the left-hand lane of a dual carriageway and veered across all the way to the right-hand lane and started slowing down. So we thought it was a bit bizarre.
What's happened to him up in front?
I was driving, so I pulled up beside the van. We looked through the passenger window and saw him collapsed.
The man had suffered a stroke while driving and was now unconscious in the fast-moving vehicle. But these passers-by were determined to at least try and save him.
My initial thoughts were to pull in front of him and try and stop his vehicle with my vehicle. However, when we looked up the lorry in front of us, the driver indicated to us that he was aware of what was going on and he was going to intervene.
Russell had managed to pull alongside the van and had a unique viewpoint to assess the situation more closely.
I could see that the guy had collapsed at the wheel and was totally unconscious, but he'd obviously still got his foot on the throttle. The other two guys in the other car, they were obviously shadowing him, and I thought, well, they need some help in controlling this situation, and I was in the perfect vehicle. You spend so long sat in these vehicles, they become like an extension of your own body. You know exactly where every part of that vehicle is at all times.
Russell's experience and quick thinking saw him try a brave but potentially dangerous move with his lorry.
I undertook, got in front of him, and then just kept watching him in the mirror. He was still running up against the barrier, then just nipped him up against the barrier. Just a tiny little manoeuvre, so that his van, the barrier and my trailer all came in contact at the same speed, at the same time, and just then put the brakes on and brought him to a stop.
Tom had jumped out the passenger side of my vehicle while I was still rolling and ran over to the van. I must admit, it was extremely clever. You couldn't have got him in a better place because the bed of the lorry was exactly the correct size as such to bring the van to a stop. What Russell did was amazing, absolutely amazing.
The only problem was, once we got him to a stop, the van is then trapped between the barrier and the trailer, and we can't get the doors open.
With time now critical following his stroke, will the men be able to reach the driver to get him the medical help he needs? Earlier, teenager Harry fell from a 30-foot waterfall and was left lying waiting for help. But being in a remote location meant any rescue attempt would take time.
We were all down by the pool and we looked up and saw the first paramedics coming down.
Finally, after an hour, the rescue services managed to reach Harry, including the doctor from the Northumberland National Park Rescue Team, Philip O'Donnell.
As I approached Harry, I could see that he was quite pale. I could see that he was awake and looking around, which was reassuring. So I was concerned about the right side of his chest. He was obviously in quite an amount of pain and was struggling to take a good deep breath. I was conscious that having fallen the height that he had, there was a potential for him to be bleeding internally.
Meanwhile, 15 miles away, Harry's mum and dad had just arrived at their hotel break and were starting to relax, unaware of any problems.
We sat in the beer garden, we had a couple of drinks, and life was feeling really good.
And Katie was just starting to get a bit worried because she didn't have any phone signal, so she wanted to go back up to our room just to see, to make sure that she hadn't had any messages.
Straight away, pinged up with 3 missed calls from one of Harry's friends who would never normally ring me. So I just, like, my stomach just kind of lurched because I thought, oh, something's happened at the river.
Worried and fearful of what might have happened, Katie immediately called back.
And she was asking me if he was okay. But none of us really knew.
I think the friend was quite panicked actually himself and just not wanting to make us more panicky about the situation.
But Dad Martin, a doctor, was starting to get worried now too.
I mean, I think he was trying to reassure us by just saying he's awake, he's talking, and he's on the stretcher now. But of course, that lack of detail just frightens you even more.
At the waterfall, they had done all they could for Harry on the ground, and it was now critical to get him to hospital. Quickly.
So I was conscious that a helicopter was coming because it was time critical to get Harry to the hospital.
But as the helicopter couldn't winch Harry out from where he lay, the team would need to use their climbing expertise to get Harry up the steep slope.
Obviously, there was a sense of urgency in terms of being able to move Harry up the slope so he could be airlifted as soon as possible. So moving the stretcher up the slope involved around about 8 team members. So the team members are walking up the slope as the rope's being taken in.
And as we were moving, Harry started to develop worsening pain up in the right-hand side of his upper abdomen. I felt that that might be a sign that there was bleeding in or around his liver. He could have bled to death effectively, and there would have been little that we could have done for him at that point.
About an hour's passed now. The winchman's down by the stretcher, and we've got a couple of team members who are going to use a system called a high line. Essentially, that stops the stretcher from spinning as it's lifted into the helicopter.
Yeah, I was just thinking this might be a bit worse than I was thinking.
As Harry was rushed to hospital, his parents wanted to get there to meet him.
We'd rung 111 to find out what was happening, and they said that they'd booked a heliport at the RVI in Newcastle. So as soon as we knew he was going to go to the RVI, then we could actually do something.
We phoned, and the receptionist said that she could just hear him landing in the helicopter then. But she told us that there was a full trauma team waiting. We thought, why do they think he needs a full trauma team there?
Should we go up this way? Yeah.
Harry's father was getting even more concerned.
You're terrified that there's going to be a life-changing injury, you know, a serious head injury or a spinal injury. So you can't really say anything out loud because they're just... you know, it's just...
You all right?
As they arrived at the hospital, they rushed in looking for news of their son.
Yeah, well, when they took us through to the relatives' room, you really think that something awful's happened.
A nurse came out and she said, look, the doctor, he can't find any really serious issues. There's no internal bleeding, no spinal damage, looks like no brain damage, because we didn't actually realise that he had hit his head in the fall.
Even though the news was good, they still had to wait 2 long hours before they could see him.
It seemed a long time to wait, but then when we went through to see him, and yeah, it was the same old Harry with a smile on his face.
He was just acting as though nothing had happened.
A natural teenager, like the first question he asked, where's my phone? Which we didn't have. We didn't have for him. It was with one of his friends, so he borrowed mine just to quickly get in touch with some of the friends that had been there that day, just to reassure them that he was okay.
Said he'd got a broken wrist, but other than that, he was just about okay. And that's when we kind of, all relaxed a bit.
After a few days in hospital, that eventually they realised it was just my wrist that had actual damage on the bone. The shoulder and hip was just sort of muscle damage, soft tissue damage.
I don't think anybody could believe it, like the doctors at the hospital, the people that helped him on the day. No one could believe that he was lucky enough to escape that with just essentially a broken wrist.
I think I was just really lucky with the way I fell on the rocks, really. I think that's all it comes down to.
I mean, so many people have more minor falls and get far worse outcomes. So we're just incredibly grateful.
Earlier, a van driver in the UK suffered a stroke while driving on a busy dual carriageway. Having managed to stop his vehicle, the rescuers are now desperately trying to reach the driver.
The lorry had obviously sandwiched the van between the lorry and the central reservation, so there was no access into the van at all. We couldn't open any door.
They even tried accessing the driver via the back doors, but no luck. Reaching him was looking impossible.
Tom initially tried to break the windscreen to get in and couldn't.
Luckily, other drivers had noticed the unfolding drama and stopped to help.
Fortunately, another guy who was there to help found a metal bar and broke the passenger window.
One of the guys then climbed in, manoeuvred the fella so we could get hold of his arms, and we pulled him out through the passenger side window and laid him on the back of my trailer.
Yes, hello, ambulance, please.
Despite being safely out of his van, the man was still unconscious, so Renata wasted no time in calling the emergency services.
No, he's not unconscious at all. Both myself and Tom are first aid trained. We have to be through our job. There was no reactions from him, there was no movement. He was just literally a dead weight.
His breathing's OK as well. Yeah, Tom, isn't it?
He was breathing. However, we were unsure whether he would deteriorate and potentially whether we could lose him. We just kept him warm, comfortable, and relayed all the information back to the emergency services until someone arrived. It seemed like a lifetime. It probably wasn't.
Luckily, the ambulance was soon on the scene and treated the man who had suffered a stroke. But it was thanks to the rescuers' quick thinking and bravery that he survived and went on to make a full recovery.
You know, that's got to be the luckiest guy ever, that so many people who would bother to help happened to be in the same place at the same time. I mean, whoever would have thought the safest place to have a medical issue is driving in the fast lane of a dual carriageway at speed.
Central reservation, which was actually keeping him from veering off anywhere else. A mile and a half down the road, that central reservation stopped. The van would have veered into the oncoming traffic in the dual carriageway, which could have been catastrophic. So yeah, Russell's actions were fantastic. I think what he did was phenomenal.
And for the humble heroes, it's a day none of them will forget in a hurry.
I'm not trying to dismiss what we've done as being extremely easy. There was no thought process. It was just a natural reaction. This guy needs help. Everybody was equally as much of a hero. I mean, I've been classed a hero. I don't look at it that way myself.
It was a pretty emotional day. Obviously, heading back from a funeral of a friend of ours. And then ending the day, I suppose, saving somebody's life. Very emotional day.
This is the moment that a team of 18 from the Mountain Rescue Services rescued a 17-year-old boy who had fallen from a 30-foot waterfall. Two months later, Harry and his parents have gone to the Mountain Rescue Centre.
Hello, Harry, nice to meet you.
To meet up for the first time with the team who saved him.
Ian. Yeah. So how are you, Harry?
Yeah, good, thanks. Good. Thanks to use.
Yeah.
Yep. Cast is off.
Yes.
In my splint.
Yeah, so what looked like could have been a long road to recovery, actually, you've been very lucky.
It was my hip I was most worried about, and that went basically straight away. So.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't until the next day when my friends were sort of feeding me all the social media, all the reports from the Mountain Rescue, and just the listing of all the people that had been there giving up their time for him.
There's 2 different mountain rescue teams involved, the Coast Guards, there was ambulance paramedics there, and they all did a fantastic job, particularly the volunteers from the Mountain Rescue, so we wanted to do some fundraising for them.
So we're really grateful for everything you've done for Harry, and we've been doing some fundraising for you guys. There's a cheque for each Mountain Rescue team.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much.
So much.
That is amazing. That's really generous.
Really fantastic.
You know, it doesn't cover a fraction of all the time that they've given, but it's just a way of saying thank you.
And we don't actually get to hear what's happened after an incident, so to actually find out that you're well, you're going to make a full recovery, and you've raised some funds as well. It's really...
Massive thank you to all of them, really. Mountain Rescue, paramedics in the helicopter, people in the helicopter, doctors, nurses, everything. Without them, it would have been a really different outcome, so I just need to be thankful for them, really, and just grateful for how lucky I've been.
But no reunion would be complete without the medic who treated him.
What have they been doing with your wrist then, Harry?
4 weeks till I can get back into rugby, so should be all
A bit
right.
longer than that, I think, probably.
So these are all some of the guys and girls who were there on the day as well. Yeah.
How you doing?
He's an incredibly lucky young man to have survived with the injuries that he did. Working on the air ambulance, I get to see a number of people who have falls, and it could have been much, much worse.
Back to the waterfall in a few days.
Yeah, just give us advance notice.
For Harry, these volunteers' heroic actions saved him from further injury, and his recovery has given him time to reflect on his actions.
I have learned that maybe I should stop being such an idiot with some of the things I do. Maybe I should be less of a risk taker.